A thing that I think I've mentioned to you or wrote about that I think a lot about is like the ways that we as humans have opportunity to sort of follow libido into surprising and new relationships outside of our social sphere. All of a sudden, you can develop kinship with people that you wouldn't necessarily, if your prerogative was finding your lifelong soulmate partner and that was going to be the only person you had sex with, or if you were limited to only the people within a certain like rank, education, socioeconomic, language, cultural background, racial background, these things. And I think animals really show that they disrupt that. They're like, oh, who's around and who wants to have sex? And like that is really liberating. That's really freeing and can lead to a lot of revelations about like what your needs are, what your wants are, what your desires are, what your holdbacks are, what your prejudices are. When you just start to be like, what if sex was this way of getting to know other people? What if I was really open?
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jace.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
Songs I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're doing something a little bit different today in that instead of focusing on humans, we're going to be focusing on animals and the animal kingdom, or animal queendom, I suppose also is possible. Today we have a guest, Owen Ever, from the Field Guide to Gay Animals podcast. Owen Ever is a community-oriented artist and educator committed to wonder, history, and healthcare justice. They were previously a curator and historian at the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum. They worked in HIV support and prevention at a community clinic, and were a research associate with the CDC's National HIV Behavioral Health Survey. They are a theater maker, therapeutic medical clown, I have questions about that, and find queer joy in birdwatching. And whether that means an unusual joy or a gay joy, we'll have to find out. Listeners, if you're interested in learning more about our fundamental communication tools that we developed for humans in any type of relationship, that book is called Multiamory: Essential Tools for Modern Relationships, which covers our most widely used communication tools. And you can check out our first few episodes of this podcast for some of our most widely shared episodes as well. And with that, Owen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Whenever I listen to my biography being repeated and reflected back to me, I'm like, what a notorious dilettante I am. Yes. Lifelong learner, have been doing many things, just the pursuit of care and wonder in so many ways. And a lot of these things that you mentioned, especially working in HIV care, outreach, prevention, and being a therapeutic joy practitioner in hospitals, aka medical clown, can be really overwhelming, can be really draining on all of my systems and taxing my personal life, my interpersonal life. And so over the past, 5 years, I've really leaned into being a person who finds joy in nature, and birdwatching has become one of the main avenues for that for me in all of the ways. I mean, where I bird in the park here is also the cruising grounds. So if I get there early enough, there can be opportunity.
People or the birds?
I like to believe that I'm a participant in mutual voyeurism. That the birds are cruising, I'm cruising, we're cruising for birds, we're cruising for each other.
Birds are watching you, birds are watching the humans cruise, humans watching the birds cruise.
And I like to think they must get some sort of joy or satisfaction from the momentary diversion that I bring into their lives, in the same way that I disrupt the atmosphere, the sort of the stressors of a clinic or a hospital or a shelter. I believe that I can do that for animals as well. And they certainly have provided that for me. And so that pursuit, that interest has led me into finding the new ways that I can feel reflected and affirmed by the animal queendom, as we at the Field Guide pod like to
Nice.
say. So thank you for bringing that back. And so, yeah, we made this podcast, which launches in June.
Amazing. So to start off on a strong note here, and just to cut right to what everyone at home is wondering, could you tell us what is the gayest animal?
What is the gayest animal? Oh, I'm glad you didn't give me a lot of time to prepare for this, because I would have there's so many definitions. There's such a spectrum of queerness. Well, obviously humans. We do forget a lot that we are
Okay.
mammals. And I think
Fair.
that there is such a forgetting of that. And part of this podcast is about fostering that connection. But that's actually not the answer I want to give. Right now, what comes to mind is the humpback whale.
Oh,
Really?
not at all
would-
what I expected.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. I think that there's definitely animals that have a higher frequency of gay sex that have been observed for longer amounts of time. Animals we'll discuss and touch on today. But I'm choosing the humpback whale for a couple
Because
of
it's in
reasons.
the name? Is that why? Because it's like just like
Because
it says on the
it's
tin?
in the name. I mean, it's like the magic was written and they have only fulfilled the prophecy. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with the fact that only in March of the year 2024 were humpback whales ever documented having sex.
Oh.
It was the first
Of any kind?
observation of any kind.
Wow.
And it
Oh, wow.
happened to be gay sex.
What?
Yes.
And
Oh my
so there
goodness.
is
100% of observed sex.
exactly 100%. Not to, there's a certain level of gold star that I think
Sure.
they get for that. I just think that I want to celebrate that about the humpback whales, welcome them into the family. And just the beauty of them being you human creatures are literally obsessed with us. And we're these profound, charismatic megafauna who are, sucking and fucking in so many ways in stealth mode, which is also something that I think is part of the queer legacy. But then are we're going to surface and let you watch the most beautiful, sensual, I'm blushing, just the best sex that you've ever seen between these two male humpback whales. And I just,
my goodness.
it's so beautiful. And so I have a record of the humpback whale songs. And I'm just going to be listening to that all Pride Month. That's my gay anthem this
Yes.
year. Right?
So
Theme of
good.
the summer, for sure.
The theme of the summer. The humpback whales. New king.
So, okay, so was that, so scientists finally observing that, had there been any other humpback whale behavior to suggest that they have any kind of homoeroticism or anything like that? Or was it all just kind of presumed, probably pretty functionally heterosexual? Or do we have examples of other whale species
Yes,
who
you
maybe
could do a
have given that sort of
comparative
behavior?
analysis. Yeah, the ocean is really gay. You could have an only fins account because thank you. Homosexuality is very prevalent among whales, baleen whales, toothed whales, all kinds of whales. So the right whale, the gray whale, the blue whale, these have all been witnessed having sex. So there's precedent. And I think they were just keeping it to themselves, they're very DL about it for a long time. Dolphins and porpoises have a lot of sex. They're one of the most sort of sexually active, charismatic in terms of same-sex pair bonding, partnership, mounting. That definitely exists a lot. So we could presume, but it had never been witnessed in terms of science. I will say, I'm sure it has been witnessed before, sex among humpback whales, but this is the first documented account. And there's only a few, to my knowledge, other animals that have only been witnessed in male-male copulation. The first ever documentation of octopuses actually was two males. There's an incredible 16-minute video, which we can all Google after this, of two males. And then there's the black-rumped flameback woodpecker, which again, you're the name
It's in the
It's the
name.
name.
sort of
Yeah.
implies.
Yeah. Like somebody knew. Yeah.
We knew.
Yeah.
There was a knowledge. There was a knowing. There was a queer knowing. So, yeah.
I feel like dolphins get this reputation of they're the only other species to have sex for pleasure, but clearly that's not the case, because if there are animals having gay sex, then they're having sex for pleasure. It's not for procreation. So
Yes,
can you
yes.
dispel that myth right now? Like, that's not a thing.
Yes, that is a myth. That is a myth.
Okay.
And that's a myth that we have sort of gotten off on the wrong track, going all the way back to Darwin, who also wrote about the pursuit of pleasure and the pursuit of beauty. He didn't believe that the only imperative of existence was reproduction. He saw that there was an abundance of energy and all of these things exist. And so pleasure among mammals is abundant. They have very similar receptors, sensory receptors and nervous systems to us humans. And so they receive pleasures. Great apes are amazing examples of this. They also are tool makers and make tools for masturbation. They have invented so many ways of having sex. And so the types of sex, the diversity of sex, we're not unique and special in it at all, actually. We like to think that we are, especially, even when it comes to like the missionary position. It was believed for a long time that humans were the only advanced culture to have sex face to
To have
face.
such an advanced sexual position.
Right. So advanced. And even there's like biopolitics within human cultures. It received its name missionary position because it was like we have to teach other less civilized people how to look each other in the eye. But great apes also have missionary position sex as well. And then they do it all other kinds of ways. And then they've invented ways, and they have ways that they can have sex that we can't have sex, which is something I think about a lot. Like, what are all the other ways of experiencing pleasure that animals have that we don't know anything about? That we could that we can only imagine about, and
It
we
sounds
have
like
such
a thought I had when I was on mushrooms once, honestly.
right. Yes,
Love it.
exactly. When you start to contemplate the like diverse exuberance that exists in the world, it is psychedelic. Elephants can transmit vibrations to each other over long expanses of space, and what's stopping them from sending sex messages to each other, from like exploring these ways of like being able to whisper across time and space to each other? Like, that is so beautiful. I know that there's a hesitation among practitioners of science to anthropomorphize animals. We are not those scientists right here, right now. And in fact, I'm interested in the like converse of that. Like, what is it? How can we think of ourselves more as animals? How do we lean into like our somatic experiences, our experiences as herd animals, the way that we receive comfort by being around each other? That's something that I practice when counseling, when testing, when in hospitals. Like, what are the ways that we can trigger a sense of safety, of joy, of laughter with each other? And animals do this for each other. And we'll get into some of that today.
Well, so you bring up the anthropomorphizing piece and how, sometimes, obviously it's really hard to divorce ourselves from having a human lens when we look at things. And that made me question, do we have a lot of examples of either we look at something and read it as asexual behavior when maybe it's not actually, but also vice versa? Because I imagine there must also be a history of seeing animals engage in sex or engage in sex for pleasure or engage in queer sex. And with that human lens, we decide, no, that must not actually be what it is.
Yeah. I would go so far to say that not only is it difficult to divorce our human brains from the observations we're making and the interpretations that we're making, it's impossible. And I think that, in working in like human subject research, we have a lot of built-in checks and balances for the biases of the researchers, but we know so little about the behaviors and motivations of animals that we rarely are stopping to check, like, what are the biases that I'm bringing to my observations and to these interpretations? Science is a practice. It reflects the worldview of its practitioners. So absolutely, over the past few centuries, there have been so many examples of scientists observing sexual behavior and either misclassifying it as entirely just based on aggression, especially if it's male-male, or ignoring it, and then it doesn't end up into the data. It doesn't end up being perceived as like functionally relevant because
They're
they're
just
not
like, oh, that
talking
was a
about-
weird fluke.
They're like,
So-
that's a strange fluke.
Yeah.
That's aberrant. It goes against our sort of prevailing theories. If we have a thesis, which is, survival of the fittest, how does this fit into it? It doesn't. That goes to the side. And when we have the benefit of like time or distance, whether it's, like we're looking back a decade or we're coming from the outside talking to scientists who are practicing today, we have the benefit of picking up the ways that sort of the moral miasma of the culture that we're in, the like political context, the historical context, does seep into the language we use. A scientist will very readily talk about monogamy, parents, fathers, mothers, these things, but then will be really hesitant to say homosexuality. And I think a lot of that is because we've attributed so much shame and stigma to things like non-monogamy, to things like homosexuality, to queerness, that we don't want to project that onto animals, which I agree with. But I also think that it's useful. There's a utility to see queerness where it is, to see same-sex behavior where it is, whether it's mounting, whether it's pair bonding, to really just acknowledge that that's existing and to see what that's bringing up for ourselves in that.
So we have a few different animals that we're going to talk about in this episode. And Owen, why don't you start off with the first of those that you wanted to talk to us about, which is giraffes.
Oh, giraffes. This is a perfect segue, actually, to what we're talking about. Because so often, giraffes, they're amazing. Their necks, incredible.
Incredible.
Incredible, And so much has been made about like the role of adaptive evolution in these necks so that they can sort of outgraze other herbivores. But also male giraffes have developed something specific to them, to their sort of sexual culture, which is called necking. And they will begin by like hitting their necks together, caressing and exploring each other's bodies. Giraffes have their own sort of preference as to what side they like to be on. They're like, I'm the top, I'm the bottom, I'm left-handed, I'm right. So they will explore in that. They will explore each other's genitals. They get incredibly aroused. There's erections. Can we talk about like very untoward things on this
Go
podcast?
on.
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
very
great.
untoward. Well, I think
Okay.
I've seen footage of male giraffes doing it, but again, like I think in every nature documentary, it's always been coded as aggression, even though
Yes,
it
and
often
so-
doesn't look necessarily very aggressive sometimes.
And so it is predominantly coded as aggression, as seen as a way of establishing a social order among the males. And this happens across many species. When you see male-male sexual activity or courtship, it's like, oh, this must be territorial. This must serve some social function that is robbing it of its eroticism. If a male giraffe is exploring a female giraffe's body and like, sucking in her pee pheromones, it's like clearly they're horny. Like we don't even
Right.
need to look
We
further.
don't question it. Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
question it. We're not looking into like, what are their dynamics? Like, do they copulate? Like, have they known each other before? With the males of the species, it's like they must be fighting. I don't know. So it's often called like jousting, ritualistic jousting. But giraffes offer this exceptional rebuttal to that because they do, in fact, have a hierarchy within the males of the herd. They do have a degree of social dominance, but when it comes to the necking, to the sex, to the copulation, all of that goes out the window. It's total homo communism. It does.
Wow.
They don't.
Wow.
Yeah, they don't prescribe to any of that. And they have gay sex with such high frequency. There was a study in Tanzania that over 3,200 hours, they observed and recorded every copulation, and they saw 18 copulations. 17 of them were gay sex. Female giraffes rarely have sex. So they're having so much sex, and it has nothing to do. It has to do with who's around. It has to do with who chooses to engage. Often it's observed that two giraffes will begin this and others will watch and get horny and then, offer themselves. And so they really explore all different types of sex that isn't about who's in charge. They're like, this is an opportunity to break those, to have this liberatory sexual experience. And then also, they rarely ever injure each other. There's a certain virtuosity to this act that if it was about aggression, if it was about putting another fella in its place, you would see more injury, but they know
Of course.
precisely how to use these giant necks, how to swing them at each other in a way that's arousing. It's like the principles of BDSM. They know
Right.
when to get to that edge and to not actually cause any harm.
Can I just ask, like, right off the bat, and this may be a silly question, but like, are the giraffes just born this way? Like, why? Meaning,
Or did they watch too
What
many
is-
musicals? Or
no,
like, what?
exactly. I'm like,
What
what's
was
the
it?
function of? And I think that's me also like anthropomorphizing the animal or saying what is the reasoning behind why an animal would be gay. But the way that you're describing it, it's almost just like because they're freaking horny and the ladies don't want to have sex and so they want to freaking do it.
Yeah.
Like, that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
But it just, can animals, like, they're just pansexual, they're bisexual or whatever, they just have sex with everyone.
Yes, I think we deeply underestimate the amount of bisexuality among the animal queendom, humans included. And so much of that, I mean, there is like an evolutionary advantage to being bisexual, to be like constantly like maintaining your virility, to seeking pleasure. There's health benefits to sex. And so animals are practicing that, especially when they're only a few male giraffes will ever have reprocentric heterosexual sex. And so they are, you know, there is truth to the fact that they are strengthening social bonds, they're forming community. There is a culture around this for sure. I think that it gets like messy when you separate the two and you're like, it's either a social function or a cultural function or it's sex, which is not true with humans. We have sex for so many reasons.
Yeah.
So many
Yeah, that
reasons.
struck me when you were saying that, you know, scientists will see this behavior and think, well, it has to serve a social function, therefore it must be aggression, and deciding what the hierarchy is, completely scrubbing out the fact that like sex has a lot of social functions in it for so many mammals.
Yes.
So
yes,
interesting.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you picked up on that. Yeah. And often scientists will look to be like, is there some other sort of like, is there like a nutritional function to like swallowing another male's semen, you know? And you're like, sure, maybe.
Do giraffes do that?
Giraffes don't do that, but bats will do that, and some other creatures will
Okay,
do
this
that.
new taxonomy of the animal world of who
Yeah,
swallows
yeah.
and who doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's like we need to just deeply dive into this and figure out who's into who. It's like, can the animals start flagging? I need to know who's into the piss play, who's into the whatever. But yeah, so often we do try to look for like, where's the evolutionary advantage for this? How did this develop over time? But I think like we're on the wrong path when we think that it has to have some outcome other than just like the benefits that pleasure bring to your physical, to your emotional well-being, and to the social bonds that you're forming. These are all really important to animals, especially herd animals. This is like a huge part of how they spend their time together. I mean, what else are they doing? They don't have
Other
television.
than eating and avoiding predators and
Yeah, they don't have emails. Like, we were put on this earth to like eat figs and have orgies. So,
right.
and
What a
here we are
quote.
making podcasts. So,
Well, so speaking of eating figs and having orgies, I want to start talking about non-monogamy within the animal world. And I know that when I was growing up watching nature documentaries in the Discovery Channel, I think the sense that I always got was it's a little bit of like, yeah. Most of the animal queendom is not monogamous. Like, sure. But we're not animals as human beings, right? We're different. And these 5 other species that allegedly practice monogamy, and we're kind of like the more special ones in this particular club. And so I guess I just kind of wanted to open that up as a topic, specifically non-monogamy in the animal world, and the ways that we have interpreted or misinterpreted that as humans.
yeah, I like to think of it as the monogamyth because it is often championed among animals as like there are a few that we can sort of put on a pedestal and say like, if we are going to see ourselves reflected in animals, these are the 5, you know. And the
Right.
more that we understand the behaviors of animals as like more observations are happening, as technologies are increasing, we're realizing like that's just not true. they aren't. They are not practicing monogamy. I read a study in the making of this podcast that compiled a lot of different data sets and proposed that only 3 to 5% of all species worldwide practice any form of monogamy. And some of that is only within breeding periods, like just seasonal monogamy. And like that, so that's just like only for a few months. And then after that, like many penguins. And then that goes out the window. But that's such an example of the way that the cultural project of like family values, of monogamy, of heteronormativity, patriarchy seeps into what we're allowed to extrapolate from what we're witnessing, even when there's an abundance of evidence to the contrary. You're like, okay, so,
Yeah.
39,000 other species are not doing this. And yet we're supposed to hold ourselves and a few other animals to this like standard that feels so unnatural. And there's animals giving us so many examples of ways to exist outside of that structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned penguins briefly, and that's one of the ones that I wanted to bring up that I thought was so interesting because when that Morgan Freeman Penguins documentary thing came out several years ago,
March
one
of the
features,
Penguins. Yeah.
That's the one, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
The monogamy of them and how closely they bond while they're coupling up was so emphasized and so romanticized in that. And one is, like you mentioned, that pairing up just happens for that mating season. And sometimes the next year they'll pair up with that same person again, but often they don't. And so it's more of like a serial monogamy rather than this kind of romantic lifelong monogamy that I think the producers of that documentary projected onto those animals and then make us feel like, oh, we should hold penguins up on a pedestal as this example of beautiful monogamy in nature.
Focus on the Family loved this movie so much.
Oh,
They were
God.
like, this
Yeah.
is the greatest triumph since the Passion of Christ.
God.
It was like that movie was such a tool for the perpetuation of this myth that like the only way that we should care about animals is if they are practicing family values in some way. And it felt, I rewatched it recently on the plane to New York. And
wow.
was just like, oh my goodness, this is like such a small fraction of the reality. And also it's kind of painful how much is being projected on these animals,
Yeah.
forcing them into a narrative that just like doesn't hold how exceptional they are.
Yeah, the thing I found so fascinating was I had heard that before years ago about them actually being more like serial monogamist. And then more recently, when I was looking into this before this episode, I learned that from doing DNA studies of the penguin babies, that even amongst those super closely bonded pairs, that a good portion of those babies are not genetically related to the father even. And so even within that, there's not monogamy even within one mating season that's supposedly where they're so tight that they
There
still will have sex
truly
with
is
others.
not. There truly is not. It's like they have an agreement of a certain amount of pair bonding and
Some co-parenting
co-parenting,
agreement.
a co-parenting agreement. Like if we wanted to like have some terms, like I would say they have a co-parenting agreement, but there's a lot of egg switching. There's, the documentary does a good job of showing sort of like the travails that they're up against. Many perish. And so there's so much switching of the family units, but also there's like a lot of male and female bonding happening and sex and pair bonding and like a high frequency of these couples taking over or adopting eggs that have been abandoned or even just stealing them and raising them to fledge with like high frequency, which a lot of birds will do, especially swans, recently whooping cranes, which are like nearly extinct. And then they're like, oh, and also there's gay ones among the flock. Like, so it's not the product of overpopulation, but yeah.
Aren't swans also often held up as a paragon of birds that mate for life? Is that
Yeah.
true or not?
They
I always
are.
feel like I have to question every animal claim.
It's so true. Some owls have been held up, and recently technology has allowed scientists to listen to their night calls and interpret them and realize that they have,
They're saying, hey, you up?
yeah. And so
they're-
they will, yes, send each other WID, you up right now. And they're realizing that
Amazing.
this whole time they're thinking that they're nesting in these like specific pair bonds, and they're actually switching. They're all swingers at night. And they know because they call out each other's names, and then we'll go over. And it's like,
Amazing.
even the wise old owls.
Yeah, the swans, Dedeker, was one I looked up as well, and they did that DNA testing on their cygnets, I guess is what baby swans are called. 20% are not from the pair of their
Wow.
offspring.
So
So,
maybe
also,
similar to penguins, where they create a little co-parenting agreement, but then
Yeah,
they swing
yeah.
at night
right?
Yeah.
and come back before the kids are up in the morning.
Yeah,
One thing that I learned in the making of this podcast is that, specifically about March of the Penguins and the Adelie penguins, is that their sexual diversity and homosexuality was documented back in 1910 by George Murray Levick, a famed Antarctic explorer who did most of the like foundational work on penguin behavior that is like continually drawn upon, built on. He observed sexual solicitation, lots of homosexuality, what he called hooligan cocks, lots of masturbation, just like
Hooligan Cox
hooligan
is
cock.
also
Yeah, we
the
gotta
name
stop
of my
around
band.
hooligan- yeah.
so-
yeah, exactly. Hooligan cocks. He was so disturbed by this that everything outside of the like reprocentric family unit narrative, he wrote in secret code and did not publish. And it remained unpublished until 12 years after the March of the Penguins.
Okay, but he still knew I need to document this.
He knew and he documented, but he was just like, I cannot reconcile this. I can't go back to the academy, to my peers. What will they
Right.
think? They'll think I'm perverse. They'll think I'm a homosexual, which is something that so many scientists have been up against, even recently within the past few decades, not knowing if their institution will support them, not knowing if it will change the way that their science is looked at. We've spoken to scientists who observed non-monogamy and homosexuality among Japanese macaques, for example, and she was laughed out of the academy and would not go on the record, and really, really exists with like a high amount of paranoia and was like, please don't do this. Like,
Wow.
so it exists and it is closeted. And like the penguins are such an example of that. But at the same time, we have like Roy and Silo at the Central Park Zoo, the famous gay penguins. When you do like a voice of the people, what's a gay animal? They're like penguins. I don't know, penguins. We have, that's like a cultural touch point, gay penguins, but it's because of this idea of respectability politics. They're like, okay, we can wrap our head around the idea of penguins being gay because we already have this sort of false belief that they're monogamous, that they're going to like reflect our values. Whew. So we'll
And we're
let
going to make sure
one
that
go.
they just want marriage rights, you
They
know.
want marriage
so-
rights, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the Roy and Silo were acclaimed by both the Christian right and also the marriage equality movement,
Oh my
which was
gosh.
really interesting. And it's like they're just bisexual penguins at the zoo, like along with so many other animals here. So
Wow. Amazing.
Mind-blowing.
Okay, I want to move us along to the next animal that you brought for us, which is bonobos. Bonobos, how do you say it? I never know.
bonobos.
Bonobos.
They're already now. Bonobos have already done some good PR in the non-monogamous
Oh,
community
yeah. They
because
have, for
yeah,
sure.
like
Sex
that.
at dawn.
Yeah,
Oh,
sex at dawn, like all the research, and I think that work has disseminated enough into the non-monogamous community that people are like, wow, cool, bonobos, yay,
Yeah, I'm curious, like, what comes to mind when you think of the bonobos and their proclivities?
Sex all the time is the first thing that comes to mind for me. Sex is social currency, and sex as like social bonding, and highly bisexual, and not just also like sex involving genitals, but my understanding is also, like French kissing and like looking
Yes.
into each other's eyes, and again, to project a little bit these things that we tend to consider a little bit more like courtship or like romance, that those are some of the behaviors that have been seen in bonobos.
Another one I remember was that when two tribes of bonobos would meet each other, that kind of the way they would establish like a non-aggression between them was to have sex with people from the other tribe, I guess, something like that.
Yes.
Is what I remember.
I think that is one of the most fascinating things about bonobos, who are our like closest mammalian relatives along with chimpanzees. They're great apes, not monkeys, but that they use sex as for reconciliation and for conflict resolution. And it's like, why not? Why not do that? Why not use it as repair and de-escalation, and like instead of becoming heightened and active and moving into a place of aggression or fleeing, why not lean into like the pleasures that we can give to each other, satisfy those things? Yeah, bonobos are so fascinating. And the thing that I wanted to bring up is this particular characteristic of their behavior that has been observed both in captivity and in the wild and in sort of orchestrated research, is that when they're presented with food or come across an amount of food, often when it's not enough, when it's a limited resource, the presumption is that they will fall into some sort of like alpha dominance hierarchy. There will be aggression. They'll become agitated because of that scarcity. And then only the ones who have like, given themselves, saddled up next to like the king male or whatever will get the food. But that's not the case at all. What they do is they play. They start the kissing. Yes, they tongue kiss. They kiss. They play. The little ones play. They have sex. All kinds of sex. Bonobo sex, to human standards, is incredibly fast. It's like 13 seconds.
Oh,
So,
wow.
like, in a
Really?
Wow.
in a short amount of time.
Well, if you've got a lot of people to have sex with, you gotta,
Exactly.
you know,
They have
through
like
it.
made
You gotta get
it
through
efficient. They've made it efficient. And they're just like, they're not just like, I have to satisfy my one partner. They're like, all of you, we could all have sex. What if we all had sex right now? And then that's going to hormonally change the way that they are feeling. It's going to foster the bonds and the connections that they have. And then suddenly they're not coming from a place of scarcity. They're capable of sharing food based on who's hungry, not based on who wants it or feels beholden to it, which is such a fascinating example of being able to share, to like meet needs of like, I don't know, like mutual aid. Like how do I foster the relationships that I have so that I feel like I don't need to make like competitive choices in the world, because I feel really grounded in myself and in my community and in my partners and in these like relationships. And I'm not just like out here unbalanced and horny
Right.
and like fighting people at the grocery store, you know?
It's making me wonder if, like at, business board meetings where we're discussing something really contentious, we're trying to figure out how these two companies could work together. If we all had sex first, if we might be able to
How
approach it with more
humbling.
generosity.
Generosity.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That post-orgasm clarity. You're
Right,
just like,
right.
Exactly.
you're just
exactly.
like, well, let's approach conflict from a place of bliss where it's like, I feel like I'm not mad anymore. Like, what was I mad about? What was I mad
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
We just have so much to learn from animals and all of these things that you're talking about. I mean, absolutely, in terms of relationships and what we talk about on the show, just being able to sit back and observe or research animals in this way can teach us a lot about ourselves.
Yeah, a thing that I think I've mentioned to you or wrote about that I think a lot about is like the ways that we as humans have opportunity to sort of follow libido into surprising and new relationships outside of our social sphere. And, I think about like dating apps, hookup apps, bars, social places, sex parties, play parties. All of a sudden, you can develop kinship with people that you wouldn't necessarily, if your prerogative was finding your lifelong soulmate partner and that was going to be the only person you had sex with, or if you were limited to only the people within a certain like rank, education, socioeconomic, language, cultural background, racial background, these things. And I think animals really show that they disrupt that. They're like, oh, who's around and who wants to have sex? And like that is really liberating. That's really freeing, and can lead to a lot of revelations about like what your needs are, what your wants are, what your desires are, what your holdbacks are, what your prejudices are. When you just start to be like, what if sex was this way of getting to know other people? What if I was really open?
Well, that's so interesting to bring it back to bonobos, because I know one thing I always think about is, yeah, like Jace, you're talking about like if two troops will encounter each other and there's a little bit of that, tension of the unknown, and the fact that they might choose to have sex with each other, for me, makes me think about like, I don't know, like the thrill of what we perceive to be other and exotic and new, right? And it feels like that tracks with what you're saying, Owen, about kind of like using libido as this pathway that helps us step outside of the comfort zone sometimes. And ideally, that's like safe for everybody, safe and consensually for everybody involved, right? But that, yeah, this pathway that helps to kind of bring down those particular barriers. It's a really interesting way of framing it. While, like, as we've been talking about particularly monogamy and non-monogamy, I know for myself, whenever I think about like animal studies and research, what always comes to my mind is, yeah, bonobos, they're the horny ones, they're the non-monogamous ones. And then always on the flip side, what comes up in my brain is prairie voles. That like, yeah, they're one of those 5 that we've pointed to be like, look, there they are. They're the monogamous ones. They're the ones who model an ideal relationship structure for us as human beings. So what can you tell us about prairie voles who allegedly sit on this opposite end of the spectrum?
Yeah. I have to admit that I know very little about prairie voles, actually. So I may need to have Jace tell me a little bit about prairie voles.
Oh, does Jace know more about prairie
Do
voles
you know
in this
more
situation?
I was researching this before this
Okay.
episode to try to have stuff, because so my touch point with voles in general is that
Okay, hold on. You have a... Okay, I can't wait to hear about your vole background.
I'm trying to even
Yes.
think what this animal looks like and where they
A
exist in the
little
world.
Cute, on the
cute
prairie.
little rodents. Yeah,
Okay.
they're
little
a
prairie
rodent, yeah.
rodents.
They're
yeah.
Oh, they're
Like-
cute. They kind of look like a
Not
little
like
hamster.
Is it like a prairie dog?
They're less
that-
long. They're a little
Okay.
more
Good way
kind
of
of
putting
mouse
it, yeah.
hamster size.
Looks a lot like a
Okay.
hamster from what I can see. Really cute, though.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, so, okay. The reason why I know anything at all about voles is that with the whole thing about a lot of animals not being monogamous, I remember that prairie voles are pointed out as this example of these beautiful monogamous living in community, pair bonding. They demonstrate anxiety when they're apart from their bonded partner. Like they really seem very attached to each other. But then I also learned about these studies making a contrast between prairie voles, which exhibit this social monogamy, and then in contrast to meadow voles, which I guess are different from prairie voles, but meadow voles are more aggressive with each other and they don't pair bond. They're just much more promiscuous. And then in studying the two, they found that the, quote, monogamous ones had higher levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, of those neurotransmitters in their brain, than the meadow voles. And so the reason why this stood out to me was, one, it's interesting, but also that it was kind of used as this potential argument to say, if you, the human, don't feel monogamous, it might just be a hormonal imbalance, or it might be that you don't have enough
wow.
of these neurotransmitters, or maybe that you could be born more inclined toward monogamy or not based on how much your brain produces these chemicals.
Like more inclined to be a happy monogamous vole versus an aggressive, cranky, non-monogamous
Meadow
Exactly.
vole.
which they also
Exactly.
look identical from Google image
Yeah,
search.
yeah.
But one
And
just
those
lives in
are the
meadow.
two options. Those are the two options.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
At a certain point, we all have to do a mole reveal
Everyone
party
has to
and
pick.
be like, which mole are you?
Which vole are you? Yeah. And then the thing that I thought was interesting is, so in preparation for this episode, I said, oh, okay, I'll look into voles a little more. And, I found out that the prairie voles do exhibit these lifelong pair bonding traits, specifically with the partner that they mate with and that they live with. Although they did find sometimes they might live together and never have offspring together, but still form a really close bond, which I also thought was
Interesting.
nice and goes
so
against that
nice.
whole idea that it's only about procreation for
Right,
animals.
that's nice.
And then, they exhibit anxiety when they're apart, and that when given a choice, they'll still tend to prefer their partner that they're familiar with as opposed to someone new. All that, yes. But again, doing these genetic studies of their offspring, 23 to 56% of litters are sired by other partners. It's like, so even in these very arguably socially lifelong monogamous ones, 25 to 56% of the offspring is not from that couple. So
Yeah.
like even within the ones we hold up as this paragon of, they've got the right amount of oxytocin and vasopressin to be monogamous, they also don't really do it.
I mean, yeah, my first thought was like, good for them. It's like there isn't the sweeping solution for any of us, especially for voles. And so good for them. But then also it's like the way that scientist has happened over time, the track record is that we usually realize there's a lot more going on in those burrows than we know. And we're only ever seeing a small portion of their social structure, of their behavior. There's usually so much more. And I think it's beautiful that they pair bond. Dolphins do this also. And I think like because they love like these strange polyadic relationships, they love group sex, they have lots of sex, the fact that they will also form and maintain lifelong partnerships is really beautiful. I think that that's really moving. I think that nature gives us the ways that this can happen alongside and with each other. There's integrated hybrid relationships that are happening, and it's like it's not all or nothing. It's not meadow or prairie. It's like it's both. Also, a fun fact about the dolphins, we cover a certain gay dolphin pair, and they've been together their whole lives. They love each other. I'm just going to say it. They love each other.
Aw.
But they do participate in like gangbangs. It's just part of, gay dolphin culture. But what I find to be really touching is that when one of them is the sort of like the bottom, the sub of the gangbang, the other one doesn't participate, chooses to not, and actually performs aftercare and will like swim around with it, will caress it, will feed it afterwards. And then we'll go and do a gangbang elsewhere, or they'll go participate together, which is just like, this is what I want. This is beautiful.
Yes.
And sometimes they'll break up, and then they'll be in other relationships, but then come back together a year later. It's just like, you're like, right. It's all about like what is working for the individual animal. I think like that's also something we think about like species, and we're like, you must be all of this. You must be exemplary of your entire species. It's not true for humans. It's not true for any animal. So I hope that every creature is getting what they need and getting those good hormones.
So it doesn't really sound, even these like pair bonded animals are still exhibiting, signs of being monogamish because they're going off and having gangbangs with multiple people as well. So is there any animal out there? I mean, I'm assuming there must be that like met at high school and then, they got married and they lived together until they died. But does that exist? Does it actually ever exist?
Actual lifelong monogamy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what people wish we did or whatever, what people wish most, I guess, humans did.
Yeah, there definitely are creatures that do that. There are a lot of birds that will be like very monogamous, but it's not like the whole species. It's not an imperative of the species. It'll just be these two birds. And like even the frequency of that will be very low. But there are, within many species, there will be some couples that are just, they also, some creatures don't live very long, and so they don't have a lot of
There you go.
opportunity.
There's not a lot
so
of
some
time
of
from
it
high
is
school to
literally,
death.
it's just like very short. And some, there are creatures like, particularly in the ocean where there's so few of them and they're so far apart that they've developed all kinds of ways of having all different types of like genitals, so that just whomever they come across, they're going to
makes
be
sense.
like, we're
Right.
bonded, we're having sex, we're reproducing. just like whatever, because I don't know if I'll ever run into another one.
Wow.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard, and I know we can't extrapolate this to every single animal that is practicing some form of monogamy, but I have heard that there's like a rough trend that in those animals that are maybe not as social, or maybe less likely to live in groups or less likely to live close to other members of their species, that may preference monogamy because, again, there's just less opportunity, right? That
Yeah.
if
And
I'm
it's
only
about
going to meet one
safety.
other one in my
Yeah.
lifetime, then yes,
Yeah.
we're functionally going to be monogamous. Or like like maybe if it's dangerous for me to come into contact with other members of my species, that then it would make sense.
Yeah, I think it's good to think about like what are the other advantages of being in a relationship. There's so many things. You're like resource sharing, a sense of safety. You only make one nest and you both stay in it. But so there are reasons why it's practiced that are beyond just being like we're like sexually inclined to only receive pleasure from one. There's, especially with more isolated creatures, and it's true, a lot of the like higher frequencies of homosexuality do come from like ungulates and like herd animals, like ones that already have like very complex social structures. And bighorn sheep have a lot of sex, but they also live primarily in sort of sex segregated herds.
That's also kind of in the name.
Yeah,
Because it would have a
No.
lot of
Horn.
Yeah.
Dogs.
The pronghorn will do like conga line mounting, where they'll all like just like mount each other like centipede style, and you're like, this is amazing.
Wow.
So we've talked a lot about male sex, but I want to talk about female sex within the animal queendom. Did you want to talk a little bit about female elephants?
Yes, I would love to talk about elephants. I should also say bonobos, their genitals, female genitals, have developed specifically for lesbian sex. They have
Wow.
adapted because of the prevalence of their like sapphic pleasures. They do a thing called genito-genital rubbing, or GG rubbing. That's like the scientific term, in which like one partner will be on all fours and the other will like dangle, wrap the legs and arms around and dangle, and they thrust their clitorises at a rate of 2 thrusts per second. And so
Whoa.
like their
That's fast.
external genitals have developed specifically in the
So
pursuit
they
of that
can
pleasure.
do
So they
that.
can do
Wow.
that.
They're like-
and so,
Bonobo vibrators.
yeah, absolutely. And they like, great apes make so many forms of vibrators and have so much sex, which is just incredible.
There was this really great docuseries about like the orangutan school in Borneo where they're rehabilitating like orphaned orangutans basically and kind of teaching them how to be orangutans right before they're released into the wild. And yeah, they got footage of one of their like tween orangutans figuring out how to use a garden hose in a particular way. And all the trainers that were cracking
We all
up,
remember
like,
our first time in a hot tub. We remember our first time at discovering the hot tub chat.
exactly where she was like sneaking out of class to go back to where the hose was.
Turn it on and have
And
a
to
good
turn it
time.
on. Like it was just fascinating.
Yeah, she's not thinking this is gonna make a baby. She's just like,
Exactly.
my body is having experiences.
Yeah.
There is wonder. I'm feeling exuberant. But yeah, elephants. So anyway, what were we talking about? Elephants. Elephants, like bonobos, are matriarchal in their societies. And sort of the converse of the giraffes. The herds of elephants will be almost exclusively female. The males, once they reach maturation, will go off and live a solitary life, and there will be herds of up to 100 female elephants living together. And when reproduction happens, they have a very long gestation period, which is also comparable to giraffes, which is why so few have reprocentric sex, because it's just like it's taxing. There needs to be a recuperation period. And so the sex is on their terms. They're sort of like, you man, you're coming in here. We'll pick if we want to have sex with you. Because they have this sort of lesbian separatist society that really sustains them, that allows them a lot of body autonomy, that allows them a lot of independence, and allows them copious amounts of sexual gratification. Female elephants will masturbate, they have sex with each other. They also have really amazing co-parenting dynamics, because they will have all of these babies and then like all kind of around the same time. They can wet nurse for each other, and they'll develop caretaking pods that will take care of the calves, while other female elephants will go out exploring, will go roaming for days, will be having sex. They form intimate, lifelong pair bonds within that are female-female, and support each other. I think it's like a beautiful example of family dynamics. I think one of the things that we are looking at in the podcast, Field Guide to Gay Animals, is not just the sex. We think that there's like so many ways that being in a relationship can be queer. And we think like co-parenting, caretaking, these are queer relationships as well. Reimagining the family structure, reimagining like what a unit can be like, and reimagining what like body autonomy is like. We're like, that is profound and that is important. And elephants are really inspiring in that. And they have a great sense of humor. They mourn their dead. They remember things. My co-host Elaine Kaplan-Levinson very much identifies as an elephant. It's like, these are my people. These are my people. This is the queer lifestyle I want. They move around. They live in multiple places. They seem to have it figured out in a really, really beautiful way.
Wow.
There's something that I want to address, something that's in the back of my mind, specifically having to do with non-monogamy, because I think that what I've seen play out in the community sometimes is there can be a little bit of a dark side to this, in the sense that sometimes people can go this opposite extreme, point to all these examples and say, look, human beings were never meant to be monogamous. Therefore, monogamy itself is toxic and it's unnatural. And sometimes this can be used as a little bit of a bludgeon against people who are choosing monogamy, right? Be like, no, it's so natural. So go to this orgy, right? It's so natural. We should be polyamorous. But I really appreciated what you said earlier about how hopefully we're able to look at behaviors through the lens of not just what is good for the species, but also what is good for that individual animal in that particular context. And that's a really wonderful way of framing it, because I think that makes sense for this sort of debate as well, that even if people can argue till they're blue in the face that like, yeah, humans were probably never meant to be monogamous, there's still going to be individuals where that context is what's best for them. And that ultimately leads to what's best for our species as well. The more of us that are able to feel happy and safe and cared for and having our emotional needs met and physical needs met, whether that's through monogamy or non-monogamy, is also good for us as a species. So that wasn't really a question. That was a little bit more of my soapbox moment where I kind of wanted to tie this all in together.
Thank you so much, so much. I think it's so important to think about animals on the individual level, because animals go through trauma. They experience things, and like, we are the product of our experiences, and that's going to influence how we want to be in relationship, and that will change throughout the course of our lives. And so what feels appropriate now, what feels rewarding now, may be different later. And that happens for animals as well, especially when we're thinking about animals within the spectrum of captivity. You know, an animal that has been in a zoo, or an animal that has been on a farm, or an animal that has been injured or lived with resource scarcity, the world is changing. They're going to have different needs, like how they feel a sense of safety, the way they connect to each other will change on an individual basis. And I think it's important to sort of overemphasize all of the diverse ways that animal relationships happen, because we're up against a deluge on the other end. Like, there's been an overemphasis of things like monogamy and heteronormativity and competition as being the end-all be-all. And so it's important to amplify these other examples, but not forget that those other things do occur. And when we have both equally balanced and weighted, that's actually, I think, where we're getting to a place of like health, joy, liberation. Like, that's actually where we're creating a healthy community, when we have both of those things and we're free to explore. Science has spent so long trying to define why gay sex happens as an aberration in the animal queendom that they've rarely spent any time as to why heterosexual sex would happen, or why monogamy would happen.
Right.
Like, it's just not even explored. It's just like, well, that's just the norm. But like, cannot wrap our heads around any of these other things. And you're like, there's countless reasons why any creature would choose to reproduce, or would choose to be in a relationship or a pair bond. And we know very little about it because we take it as the norm, as the standard, as the de facto. and then don't sort of like look at it for the beautiful thing that it is and can be when it's the right tool.
Well, this has been so great. So much fun. Oh my gosh. I've loved every minute of this. And
Me too.
Before you go, can you just talk to us about your podcast, what it is, why you and your co-host Lane decided to create it, what inspired you, besides all of the stuff that you just talked about with us that was clearly very inspiring?
Yeah. So A Field Guide to Gay Animals. We're releasing our pilot 5-episode season. It'll come out in June through July. Our investigation was really inspired by a particular book, actually. It's called Biological Exuberance. It was published in 1999. And the author, Bruce Bagamill, did an exhaustive job combing through centuries of research papers and looking at every instance where some form of queer behavior, whether it's same-sex mounting, pair bonding, parenting, courtship behavior, was referenced, even if it was incredibly marginal, and brought it all together in this 750-page book. And he did an incredible job at sort of countering the homophobia of the fields of mammalogy and zoology in doing this, and really like lit a torch for this. And so I was inspired by this book. I was given this book over a decade ago. My partner and I at the time were given this book, and we had a bunch of chickens, and we were like, they're all lesbians. Because we have like a no rooster policy here. And someone was like, you got to read this book because you might be right. And so I've been living under the specter of this book for a long time, and then was sort of like, how do I explore this? What is the legacy of this book? Do people know about it? Because it sort of happened in this like little vacuum and then failed to do much, but it's so radical and so profound. And he proposes a whole theory that he calls the theory of biological exuberance that is about like more than just reproduction. It's just so beautiful. And so part of the podcast was looking into what is that legacy? Who are all of the people who are working in sort of siloed fields to bring gay animals into public consciousness and to have these complex conversations about relationship dynamics? Have they been influenced by this book? What is happening now? What is happening now in relationship to what has happened before? And so that's part of our journey, is looking at this book, its influence, and what is like the current ecosystem of individuals, whether they be artists, scholars, zoologists, behavioral ecologists, evolutionary biologists, who are interested in this now and who are willing to talk about this now. And what does it mean for us to all sort of like find some familiar ground, some platform to feel exuberant about it?
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I learned so much, actually.
So did we. My goodness.
So did we. Learning all around. I hope our listeners
Absolutely.
did as
I
well.
hope you do too. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for having me here. And please,
Yes.
don't be strangers. Let's talk about animals, human animals
Yes.
included, whenever.
And one place where we would love to hear from you, our listener, is on our Instagram. We're posting our question of the week in our Instagram stories, which is, what do you think is the gayest animal? We would love to hear from all of you about what you think. Also, if you want to discuss this episode further, the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is in the episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can post in our private Facebook group. And you can get access to those groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Emily Matlack, Dedeker Winston, and me, Jace Lindgren. Our production assistants are Rachel Chenoweth and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.